I've got Mel Sadka here today. Mel is a friend, a neighbor, and someone that used to be a client of mine. And I think the best person to tell you about Mel is probably Mel herself. So welcome, Mel. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for having me. Yes, I am all those things. And I'm also a mom of two. And it's funny because I never start off with mom ever, actually.
Mm.
So it's an interesting thing. So that's probably one of the biggest things I'm proud of. I am also an entrepreneur. So I have a business called Capacity Creator Corporation. And I'm also the founder of a new fundraiser called Good Grief Gala. And I also am a professor at Niagara College and I teach entrepreneurship. And I'm a chicken owner.
Yeah, and you're not busy at all.
No.
And your daughter plays competitive basketball, right?
She does. She does. Yeah, I'm a gym rat in my spare time.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny how I chose you for this particular topic because we're both very similar. A lot of people probably ask you the same thing that they ask me, which is, how do you do all that?
Right.
So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this podcast is right in the name of your business, which is capacity. And I mean, I know you, I know that that's a mission for you, but like maybe you could tell everybody who's listening what it is about capacity that made you kind of decide on that as something that was important to be talking about.
Yeah, it was just this word that I became so intrigued with, right? Like I grew up in corporate and then I left corporate to go and teach. And time management was always like you'd always take a course in it or you'd be evaluated in it, right? And I started to notice after a couple of bouts of burnout, which I'm sure we'll get into, that there was a very big difference between time management and our own personal capacity, which was comprised of a lot of different things that I didn't discover until later, but just really managing, our ambition and our desire for work and how much energy did I have versus someone else and how did people accomplish certain things and then why were people getting burnt out. And I just became really deeply curious about that. And actually, again, it was because of burnout that led me to, I want to fix this. I don't want to go through this again. And I see other people going through it. So how can I come up with something clever that other people can use to stay out of burnout? So that's really how this kind of started simmering.
Now, I highly encourage people to go and listen to any of your talks or about any other videos, because I'm sure you'll get into those specific things. And that's not what I want to do today, because I think we could be here for 4 hours.
Right.
But I think, what you're touching on is so important because, when you said you lead with mom, I mean, we have a lot of hats just under the name mom that you have to wear, right? You're the taxi driver, you're the psychologist, you're managing school and time management and, life skills and all the things that go along with that. So, when I think about myself and my own capacity, I mean, Mel, I said you were a client because I was in photography and there was something that definitely happened in terms of burnout there, just the managing all of those different pieces. So I strongly understand, what you're talking about, hitting that wall, hitting that moment. And I think while I say go watch your videos, I'm sure there's got to be like a point where somebody goes, wait a second, this is actually an issue for me and I need to find the solution, right? So when I think about that division, right, there is the work priorities, the career priorities, and then there's the home priorities, whether it be your marriage, your children, whatever. Like, how do you talk when you talk, not necessarily the solution, but how do you talk about dividing those priorities? Because it's two different things.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think it's two different things. I think, we have a specific amount of capacity. And what I do with people in live events and in coaching and consulting is really do a capacity audit. And what we do just quickly is I just tell people like allow or allot a percentage amount of time that you have in all the big categories of your life. And I use the CHIEF acronym, Amanda. So we take a look at career, we look at health, we look at intellectual, emotional, we look at finances, fun, and sometimes spiritual. And then I just say, take those big buckets and allocate a specific amount of time that you have to each of those on a daily or weekly basis. And after that exercise, people are like, ooh, they don't like those percentages as much. And so what happens is that it's not just about time, it's about how healthy is your capacity in each one of those buckets, right? And so we really take a deep dive to say, like, do I have a really good capacity? And if we break it down even further to measure that healthy capacity, it's what's your level of connection, in each of those pieces. How healthy is your ecosystem and your connection? The other thing I like to evaluate with people is how are you taking care of yourself? How is your energy, in order to fulfill those commitments? And the third one is purpose. I think a lot of people blindly go about commitments and obligations and just kind of put it on, cruise control and just go for it. And it's like they forget why they're doing what they do, and they become disconnected, and then disengagement creeps in. So when I say it's kind of all one and the same, is that we show up with the same, we should be showing up with the same values, and the same attention to quality of energy to get those commitments done, and enjoy it at the same time. So I think that's where I love to be able to look at things holistically so that we can approach it with the same system.
So I agree with that. The only reason why I separate them out for me personally is because I think, what did I say before when we were talking in the initial about outsourcing parts of my life?
Yes.
Like I would never, and I don't judge anybody who does, but I don't know that I would want to outsource parenting, right? So like there's a capacity where I think it almost comes into the priorities, and kind of what you were saying about quality, where if this part of my life is important to me, I want to bring my best self to it, right? So like, does that mean that, I'm the one who packs, my child's backpack or, their weekend bag when they go somewhere or whatever? I will be honest, I don't. I have a personal assistant that does that, but I don't need to do that. That's not creating a connection with my child. The time that I spend in the car with them does, right? Like the time that we talk about their day at school and we sit down to dinner, that does. So I think like within what you're looking at, it's almost like looking at what does my time, what does me as a person need to be there for that's going to leave that lasting impact, right? I kind of talk about legacy a lot. I like to say what you leave behind, right? And whether you're the one who presses yes on your on your washing machine when you're doing your laundry, or you're the one mopping your floor, no one's going to remember that. I mean, maybe your kids would see you doing cleaning and that'd be a good example for them. But, in the grand scheme of things, I think they would want to know that they were connected more with you. So kind of, that's where my head's at. Do you see a lot of people doing that kind of stuff too, when you have these conversations going, what do I absolutely need to be needed for?
I love that you mentioned this, because I've just, I've seen you do a lot too, and a lot of great things for the community. You're so open to about parenting, and, you and your husband own this very successful business. So, it's so cool to watch. So thank you for sharing openly, because it helps other people. And, yes, it's called the art of resignation. And this is something that I help people do, because when we resign from a habit or from something that just isn't serving us, or isn't connected to our values, or isn't allowing us to really fulfill, those values and that purpose, that's where we can resign. So like I resigned from cleaning the house, and I am I'm grateful enough to be able to afford that. And that's a decision that I make financially too. So there's a bit of sacrifice somewhere else, but I'm like, I would love to have that done every other week so that, my family and I can enjoy other things, or that we're not stressed about that. Right. So I think, resigning from things that take you away from what you love to do doesn't have to cost you money either. My house cleaner is just an example, but we have to be extremely mindful about like, what is it? Where am I feeling disconnected? Where am I feeling like I need to spend more time and create more capacity for? And there's always, it's a game of subtraction to be able to add, right? This is a whole mathematical equation. So art of resignation is a big one. It's really finding out, especially in that capacity audit, what is not working? What am I not happy with? Where are the big flashing red lights that I need to address? And then again, it's stepping back to create the space for the thing that brings me most joy.
So we had like an analogy growing up. It was like a swimming pool analogy, right? You kind of want balance,
Mm-hmm.
And balance is really just the levels being at an acceptable level where if something gets thrown into the swimming pool and there's splashing happening, it's not going to send water everywhere. It's going to send a
Right.
little bit, but it's not going to be like crazy, right? But if you're at the top, the rain just came down like we've had the last couple of days, and it's just insane, then anything thrown at you, even if it's a small pebble, feels huge, right?
Yes.
That's.
Yes.
So obviously you could tell I'm quite as passionate about it as you are.
Yes.
So, when you think about your end goal in helping people, what does like a perfect world look like for you? What's that dream?
Oh my gosh. Well, when I help people, it's to prevent. There's so many things right now that are like diagnosing burnout and, validating that we're in burnout. And I'm like, okay, that's great. We have lots of those tools. They are very helpful. Some of them are scientifically, validated, which is great. I want to help prevent that. And that's where
Mhm.
Capacity Creator comes in, is to really assess where you are. And that's where I had identified and coined 4 states of capacity, right? Has nothing to do with personality, although personality does drive our states of capacity. And I think we share the exact same personality style, ENFP. But yeah, so I think, that is something to be aware of. But the 4 states are really to help us. Okay, so where are we in that? And then what I have in place for people are just in time tools and things to practice and to reassess so that they can actually see the progress that they're making so that they stay out of burnout. And so that is super important to me. I've watched myself be full on in my career, addicted to work, loving my work, doing great things, winning awards, getting that recognition. And gosh, that felt great, right? Like this
Mhm.
is amazing. And then I watch what happens at home
Yeah.
and how absent I was, how exhausted I was, how I would be sick often, like I would push through at work, bring my best self, and then just let myself collapse at home. And I had littles at that time. And I just think back, and sometimes I'll even look through my pictures. That is a story in itself. Like, what did I look like in those pictures? A lot of times it'd be like selfie laying down on the couch with my kids or on the floor. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, yeah, we were cuddling, but that's because I chose to do that too, because I was freaking exhausted.
Yeah.
And that's just not how I wanted to continue. So those were some rude awakening moments that we always have to, like, balance is elusive, right? Like it's something that we actually have to negotiate on almost on a daily basis. Like,
Yeah.
what is this going to look like today? How much energy do I have? Do I have the right practices in place? And I think that's really an important piece to be aware of.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that for me is super important because it's actually why I left photography. I wasn't able to keep that balance in terms of photography is nights and weekends, and that was all I had left with
Right.
my kids. And the time is so fleeting. I've said that a couple times on this podcast, and it's one of those things that you can't really get back. So how you use those resources is so important. I
Sure.
mean, there's no time machine yet. I mean, hopefully maybe one day, but there's no
Yeah.
time machine. So, if you're thinking of, your system, that's great. But within your system, you're giving people guidance on what they should be doing. So I was hoping maybe you had some examples and I know I'm throwing this at you. I just told you
Yeah.
about the questions before we started, but maybe you have
Okay.
some creative things that you've seen people do as an example to maintain their capacity, or maybe outsource the things that aren't needed, for them to do.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's funny because I recently had a session with an accounting firm, and I love all different types of clients. And it's funny because the accountant firm, like, I'm like, oh God, this is black and white. Like, they see things as black and white, and there's a lot of gray area in this capacity business, right? So I'm like, how am I going to do this? And so I take them through a lot of different exercises. You actually photographed me doing one of my exercises, and I'm looking for the elastic band, but just capacity elasticity, right? So there's some things that we do there. So I take them through that. I take them through some different, assessments and quizzes throughout. And the day after, I emailed the organizer and I said, hey, like, any feedback? What'd you think? And she was like, oh, it was so great. A lot of great feedback. But we had one person quit. And I was like, what?
Oh,
Like, that's never the intention, right? Like,
yeah.
and I know that I get that pushback from leaders where they're like, you're going to teach people how to say no? Like, I can't afford people to say no. I'm like, no, we are teaching people to say yes to the right things and no to the wrong things, right? Like, we
Mhm.
just teach people how to do that. So anyway, she's like, yeah. And I said, I felt bad. I'm like, I'm sorry that that happened. She's like, oh no, it's good. We actually wanted them to leave. And I think your talk actually made them realize that this just wasn't for them. And I was like, oh, okay. So blessing things. So, I joke about resignation and actually resigning from your job, but, a lot of people, really creatively, gosh, at top of my head, I mean, I can't think of anything that would be like super creative, but I think the joyous moments for me are when people come to me after a talk and say, "Oh my gosh, like I got to make a couple of adjustments. Like I'm going to go home and have this conversation with my family." So it's not just a work thing; it trickles into family. Some of the emails I get too are from parents who attend my sessions and say, "My child is now using the word capacity." And I was like, oh, right. As long as they're not using it to get out of chores, like, Mom, I
That's
don't
what I
have
was
the
going to
capacity to do the dishes. But
You
when
know,
families start using the language, it opens up a whole new dialogue. And I think for me that's where I get the most, I'm most proud, because when people unlock vocabulary and language to use to say like, yeah, it might look like I have the time, but I literally don't have the emotional or mental capacity to get that done to where it needs to go to be at. People get it. Like
yeah.
I think you give yourself more permission to say no to things that you just really can't commit to. And we're guilty as women.
And you shouldn't commit to it though, because you're not going to bring your whole self to it. And in the
Right.
end, that is a disservice to the person, right? It's really tough when you say yes to something, because then there's expectations that go along with it. And
100%.
when you don't meet those expectations, is it really, on the person who set them, who maybe wasn't looking at what you had on your plate? Is it
Yeah.
on you for saying yes? Like, I think it's kind of a mix of everything, but the best thing that you can do is if you say no and you say, I can't make that work right now, they might say, well, what if we lengthen the time frame? Or like it opens up that
It
conversation where we can
does.
talk about what does it look like for it to succeed? What could it look like to make this happen, but in a way that fits within the time frame? Maybe it takes longer, maybe, you only carry part of it, whatever the solution
Right.
is, right? So, but
Yes.
you can't set those boundaries or have that discussion if you're not willing to be open and vulnerable. And I mean, that's kind of, you know, what I'm hoping for with this podcast. Like I posted on my status, it'll be like weeks in the past by the time I share this, but who is this podcast for? And it's literally for anybody. And every topic
Exactly.
could be for anything. And in this one here, I hope anybody who's listening to this one is really like thinking about what is it in my life that I keep taking on and then I get overwhelmed and I complain about. And maybe I shouldn't have said yes to, maybe I should have reframed, and what you can do about it. One of the things that I think you'll be excited to hear, which has nothing to do with this topic, but everything to do with this topic, is I have rearranged some of my own capacity, because I've got you on my Facebook and I see all your stuff all the time. And I have begun lesson planning again. So I will be bringing back the STEM program.
Yay!
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Mel's daughter, for anybody listening, actually came through our STEM program, and she is such an amazing light. She's a very strong female individual, and you should be very proud. Yep, sorry, not to make you cry, but
No.
she's lovely. But I've had the privilege of teaching her, and I really hope maybe she'll come and create some capacity outside of the basketball schedule and come help me teach another round of young girls. Because when we make time, when we say no to things that maybe don't need us, then we can create these places where we can give back and create that change that we want. I mean, we talk about capacity in terms of moms, in terms of, the thinking of what we're expected to do. And a lot of that is society's expectations that we feel like we have to go along with. The program, and the reason why I feel like it applies to what we're talking about, is about, let's reset what this means, right? How do we throw out some of those stereotypes and just approach problem solving, science, the whole nine yards with, what could happen? What does it look like? So I feel like it still kind of ties in. Hopefully you can convince her to come and help me out.
I don't think I'll have to convince her. I think that was a really cool moment for her, because that was about 5 years ago. And she got up and you allowed her to take the lead, which I think is super important too for young girls. And she's so into forensics. So I feel like that is like right up her alley, right? So yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing it back. Yeah, exactly.
I just want to say thank you so much, Mel, for making time for your neighbor down the street.
Oh my
I'm sure
gosh,
you're.
anytime.
I'm sure. Are you in your office today, or are you at home?
I'm in my home office today. Yes. Yeah.
So I feel like it's a good thing that we got better internet on our street at this point.
Oh my God, 100%. It's been a lifesaver because yeah, I couldn't do these things without it. That's for sure.
There's a perfect example of capacity right there.
Oh my God, yes, bandwidth. They increased our bandwidth, right?
There
This
you
is
go.
what we want to do. Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. The time went by so quick.
I know you were like, you think we could fit this in this amount of time frame? I'm like, I talk fast, so
I know,
buckle up.
it's great. I know.
Thanks so much for
Amazing.
your time, Mel.
Of course. Thank you for having me.